the end.
Capcom has been on a roll since the late 2010s with well-received entries in franchises like Monster Hunter and revitalizing Resident Evil via 7/8 and remakes of 2, 3, and 4. Still want that Code Veronica remake though. This is despite some modern bumps like how Street Fighter V has turned out and the decline of Dead Rising. The early 2010s though was a much rougher time for them. Despite some successes like Street Fighter 4, there's a lot of bad Capcom did around this time. They were moving away from more flair of their games that made them what they were and wanted to appeal to a more Western audience. We already saw glimpses of this with Resident Evil 5 going in a more action route, which we already saw to a degree with the original Resident Evil 4, and this became further doubled down upon when Capcom released the misfire that was Resident Evil 6. We also had other games in this ilk like Bionic Commando, Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City, and in the case of DMC Devil May Cry, which, while the gameplay was good, the way it was presented, on top of crapping upon those who enjoy the original games, at least in the press and stuff, left a bad taste in people's mouths. Keiji Inafune noted a lot of this madness in an interview back in September 2010 with the New York Times after he left Capcom, in addition to other creatives leaving like Shinji Mikami and Hideki Kamiya. This isn't even counting things like continuing milking of Street Fighter 4 for the time with its re-releases, much like Street Fighter 2 back in the day, perhaps a foreshadowing for how today's game came to be, leaving Mega Man out to dry for some time, including canceling Mega Man Legends 3 until they got that back on track, the on-disc DLC fiasco for Street Fighter Cross Tekken, and another fighting game franchise that took a hit recently, Marvel vs. Capcom. Marvel vs. Capcom 3, The Fate of Two Worlds, was the long-awaited sequel to the excellently received Marvel vs. Capcom 2, New Age of Heroes. The latter is one of my all-time favorite games, so a sequel caught my attention. Here's some background. The original MVC3 was announced at a Capcom press show in Hawaii on April 20th, 2010. The game was in development for 2 years prior, once Capcom reacquired the Marvel license after legal limbo forcefully paused it, and is part of the reason why Marvel vs. Capcom 2 is expensive to get physically, because you can't even buy it digitally anymore. Please somebody fix that, I don't care who. Ryota Nitsuma, head of production for Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, also headed production here. You can feel some of that game's influence here, and it's for the better. The game ended up still having depth, not unlike later Arc System Works games, while simplifying things a bit to make it more streamlined. The MCU was taking off at the time, while still in Phase 1, and that also led to wanting newer players to join in, while keeping longtime fans aboard, mainly those who weren't familiar with fighting games, but were with Marvel characters. The original MVC3 came out on February 11, 2011 for North America, 2 days later for Japan, and 1 day later in Europe for the PS3 and Xbox 360. The game was well received upon release, though not many game modes and the way some of the online features were done did hurt it to a degree, but that didn't stop it from being an overall success. However, I didn't end up playing it until the expanded version, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, came out, at least fully. Given that Capcom released updated versions of Street Fighter 4 several times, this shouldn't be a surprise that MVC3 got a physical updated version, but the reasons Capcom gave didn't sit well with some, especially Angry Joe, who I will be referring to as Pissed Pablo for the rest of this video. See, less than a month after the original MVC3 came out, on March 11, 2011, the most powerful earthquake had hit the Oshika Peninsula of the Tohoku region of Japan. This also led to a tsunami with record-high waves that reached up to 40.5 meters that also caused the Fukushima nuclear disaster. This disrupted many businesses across Japan, and game developers were no exception. After the original Marvel vs. Capcom 3 came out, there were plans for additional DLC on top of the already released DLC costumes and 2 DLC characters, Jill Valentine from Resident Evil and Shuma Gorath, the latter of whom was natively playable in Marvel vs. Capcom 2, along with Miss Valentine, but under a different outfit. However, When the earthquake and tsunami hit, the whole development schedule got delayed, and the staff also had health issues at the time. They decided to just release everything on one disc. Even though Street Fighter 4 could have a digital upgrade to the arcade editions for those who had the physical disc, why they didn't just offer both, I have no idea. Oh wait, I do.
We've got to have money.
Alright, to be fair, there is more here than just new characters. The online was reworked to include a spectator mode, and the game has been rebalanced, amongst several other improvements, like more optimized netcode for a smoother online experience. Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 was released on November 15th, 2011 for North America, 2 days later for Japan, and 1 day later for Europe on the PS3 and Xbox 360. A PS Vita version came out at launch for the Vita on December 17th, 2011 for Japan, and February 22nd, 2012 for North America and Europe. A week earlier if you got the first edition Vita bundle. A PS4 version followed worldwide on December 3rd, 2016, and a PC/Xbox One version followed worldwide on March 7th, 2017. Despite some hiccups, this game was still a success, and to answer this video's question, has it aged like a fine wine? The answer is yes. Let's find out why. UMVC3 has your standard bevy of offline and online modes for fighting games. Offline modes include your standard arcade mode, which is like MVC2, where you'll go through 8 stages, with the 8th being the big bad Galactus. Versus mode allows you to play freely with a friend or computer opponent. Training will let you freely practice, and mission mode puts you in a match with specific conditions to be cleared to succeed for each playable character. The conditions start off easy, but get harder as you move up the ranks. Online mode has your standard ranked and unranked matches and comes with several new improvements. These include better netcode, spectator mode to watch matches while waiting your turn, and improved leaderboards and rematch features. The gallery mode lets you view all sorts of bonus art, character endings from arcade mode, as you beat it with them leading the team, same for character art, the comic you see when you start the game, and generally a whole bunch of good bonus materials for longtime fans and new fans to see what it's all about. UMVC3 does also have another mode in the game that is sort of a campaign that can be played both offline and online. Heroes and Heralds. This mode you will either play as a Herald for Galactus, where the characters are trying to take over the world and have sort of a Silver Surfer-like appearance to them, or you can play as the heroes. They're trying to, well, save the world. The campaigns play out pretty much the same. You'll have areas tailored to the stages in-game. As you beat the teams, the percentage meter increases. As you also play matches, you'll earn cards that can give you advantages, which you will need when the difficulty gets tougher in the later parts of Heroes and Heralds. You also have a hit list on the side, a 5x5 grid with 24 characters from the roster and a free space. Beat enough teams with opponents on the list to get a bingo, and you'll get a bonus stage. Don't lose on the bonus stage or you'll have to re-earn it. Keep pushing until you get 100% of all stages. What do you get then?
Nothing! Absolutely nothing!
Yeah, that's it. No bonus ending, no special reward, nothing. I should mention the campaigns don't have separate progress bars, meaning you can't complete one without undoing the other. It sucks, but it is what it is. Otherwise, the mode is fine. UMVC3 pretty much plays identically to its original version. One team of 3 goes against another. You can tag out and assist freely as long as your characters have health. The game uses the same 3-button simplified control scheme seen in the previous games, unlike the 6-button layout for Marvel vs. Capcom 2. There's an even simpler option for more novice players, but the standard scheme should be fine for most people playing. You also have an exchange button that launches characters in the air to start air combos. One thing that's different here is now that when in the air, you can either remove meter from the hyper combo gauge, which functions the same as in the previous game /MBC2, fill it up to perform super moves, snapbacks that will force your opponent off screen to bring in another teammate for a bit, On your opponent's side, add more to your own gauge or just deal more damage. The X Factor mechanic also returns. This allows you to deal more damage faster and even regenerate health in addition to extending combos. How long it lasts / how strong it is That depends on how many characters are active at any given time. If you lose fighters, it lasts longer and increases damage. You can also now use X Factor in the air here, and it has been rebalanced, like a lot of the roster, mechanics, and other things that could be rebalanced to make the already excellent gameplay stronger. In general, MVC3 refined a lot of what MVC2 did and made it more on point. No longer did things feel a bit looser. Everything felt more tighter, snappier, and more on point. The game even has taken a bit of influence from Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, and you really feel it here. However, the fighting is just as intense and fun as in the previous games in the series, if not more so thanks to the new features of X Factor and what have you. The controls are also pretty good though. Yes, it's simplified, but everything is responsive, on point, and it does feel like you can pull off crazy combos once you get the hang of it. Easy to pick up, difficult but rewarding to master like every other fighting game before it. The presentation itself is also very on point. The graphics look pretty good, not just for the era, but even still today. The entire game, from all character models, all stages, and everything in game, basically went from, well, MVC2 had basically a 2.5D look, 2D sprites and 3D backgrounds. Now everything is in 3D, and the game has a cel-shaded look. The Capcom characters look good with this style, but the Marvel characters look even better, like they've literally jumped from the pages into video game form. Though some Capcom characters also really shine with this look, like Beautiful Joe. Models look smooth, backgrounds are detailed and full of life, and it's just pleasant to look at. The game's aesthetics also lean heavily into the comic world of Marvel, and the entire presentation feels this way. The menus / pictures, character select screen, transition from end of battle to win screen, arcade modes, comic book style endings, this whole aesthetic is really cool to look at, and complements the graphics well that help the game have a strong and memorable look. The roster itself is another interesting thing and was kind of a contention for Pissed Pablo. The original MVC3 was noteworthy for trimming the roster down from 56 to 36. New characters on Marvel included Deadpool, Dormammu, MODOK, Phoenix, aka Jean Grey, She-Hulk, Super-Skrull, Taskmaster, Thor, and X-23. An interesting mix of characters who would have later on-screen roles, for better or worse, and some slightly more obscure ones for the hardest of the hardcore Marvel fans. The Capcom side added Albert Wesker from Resident Evil, Amaterasu from Okami. It was at one point originally going to be Jean from God Hand, but Okami was the more popular of the Clover Studios games. Arthur from Ghosts and Goblins, Chris Redfield from Resident Evil, Crimson Viper from Street Fighter IV, Dante from Devil May Cry, Hisenko from Darkstalkers, Mike Hager from Final Fight, Nathan Spencer from Bionic Commando, the crappy 2008 one that I already mentioned, Trish from Devil May Cry, Beautiful Joe from Beautiful Joe, and Zero from Mega Man. It's a mix from long-running franchises, new favorites from said franchises, and a few cult characters in there for good measure. Jill Valentine and Shumagorath were DLC characters in the original game, still being DLC in UMVC3 if you didn't buy them the first time on 7th gen versions. But let's get into that one that really irked him, UMVC3's editions. UMVC3 added 12 characters for a grand total of 50 characters, including the DLC ones. The new additions on Marvel's side include Doctor Strange, Ghost Rider, Hawkeye, Iron Fist, Nova, and Rocket Raccoon. 3 of these characters went on to play major parts in the MCU. Doctor Strange, Hawkeye, and Rocket Raccoon for Guardians of the Galaxy. And Hawkeye being the one that irked Angry Joe the most, and yet despite the fucking fact that, well, Hawkeye was literally becoming a bigger part in the MCU. So, yeah, I think he laughs on that one now, but still. Anyways, new additions from the Capcom side include Firebrand from Ghosts and Goblins, Frank West from Dead Rising, Nemesis Type T from Resident Evil, Phoenix Wright from Ace Attorney, Strider Hebrew from Strider, who was a default character in Marvel vs. Capcom 2, and Virgil from Devil May Cry. Some of these additions actually did add some much needed variety, and I feel it really helped the game's roster feel more unique compared to the more clone-like roster of MVC2. This is part of the reason I think it's aged well, as someone could watch an MCU project with someone like Hawkeye, see him in this game, and play as him, and you get the idea. This actually worked with quite a few characters in the original game as well. Just because you may not like a character doesn't mean someone else won't. whether time of release or years later. Sound is pretty good here as well. The music is probably more in line with what people would expect from a title like this compared to the more jazz-oriented soundtrack of MVC2. This is a more adrenaline-pumping soundtrack. It feels more epic. It has more epic orchestral score-like battles, slightly remixed with a little, I guess, EDM flair to it in parts. Not too much enough, but enough to help it stand out, at least in some of the tracks. But for the most part, I think it's a step up over the previous game's soundtrack, even though I've warmed up to a MVC2 soundtrack over time. The sound effects are also pretty good as well. The attacks sound impactful, environment sounds sound on point, and the game's menu sounds are also pretty good as well. And characters that use weapons, those sound appropriate as well. Voice acting is also pretty good as well. There's a mix of well-known voice actors like Johnny Young Bosch, who voices Zero, Steve Blum, who voices Wolverine and has in some other Marvel cartoons, Joss Keaton, voicing Spider-Man, who, well, he voiced him on Spectacular Spider-Man, Jennifer Hale, voicing, well, Jean Grey, and too many others to list. Anybody who was voicing a character featured in this game from another game, or in the case of Marvel, replace another game with Marvel show, was brought back, with only very slightly few exceptions. But for the most part, the voices fit, everything is acted well and sounds good. The Capcom characters do have the option to speak Japanese as well, so that's something. The Marvel characters were considered at one point to have this option, but they decided nah. Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 really fixed many of the shortcomings of the original game while keeping what made it good. It looks good, plays good, controls well, sounds well, and there's plenty to keep you coming back, and it's just fun overall. That's why I say this game aged like a fine wine, because it's still a fun game to play even about 12 years after it came out. Yes, some of the way things were handled could have been handled better. Some people I would have liked to see, though, like Cammy/Mega Man himself, not making the cut sucks. And by and large, it feels like Ultimate should have been the main game. Like, delay it for a little bit, add the extra content, then boom. Perhaps also release this not long after the main game, with only a slightly lower price tag of $40 versus the original $60. Probably didn't make it work so much either. Maybe if this game wasn't caught up in all the madness, it might have been looked at differently at the time. That said, hindsight is 20/20, so it's not too much to worry about now. If you missed out on this game when it came out, give it a shot. You can still get it as of writing this on PS4 and on Xbox One and onwards, PS4 and on Steam. The re-releases have all the DLC included, and you'll have a great time. I give Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 a 4.5 out of 5. Thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, click the big red button below to subscribe. Check out the other links in the description for more cool stuff, and check out the playlist on screen for more content. See you in the next video.